John, I'm super grateful for you to be here, and thank you for writing this amazing book. I have so many questions, and we only have so much time to go over them. So I did my best to try and find what I think would one be really helpful for my audience to know, and
Mhm.
then also highlight your expertise, and together we can co-create a very in-depth conversation on how we can utilize the power of bad.
Hmm. Great. Thank you.
So. Yeah, for those my audience that doesn't who may not know who John is, let me just tell you a little bit about this man in front of me here. John is a formal New York Times science columnist and a best-selling author. He is currently a contributing editor to the City Journal and the co-author of The Power of Bad, how the negativity effect rules us and how we can rule it. He's also co-authored a New York Times best-selling book called Willpower with his colleague Roy Baumeister. And he is, from what I understand, a very thoughtful, kind-hearted man and leader. And so, John, welcome to the show, and thanks for being here.
Thanks very much, James.
Yes. So here on the show, we do kind of a rapid fire question, very quick segment to get the audience to understand who you are and kind of a little bit of backstory. So I'm going to have 5 questions here for you and do your best to go as quickly as you can. So born and raised.
I was born in Elgin, Illinois, lived in Indiana, Minneapolis, South America, and Chile, then mostly grew up in Pittsburgh.
Nice. What's a philosophy that you live by?
I suppose maybe Stoicism a little bit. I tend to be libertarian, a big believer in free minds, free markets.
Hmm.
And I'm an optimist. I mean, I think things are generally getting better, despite having written a book called The Power of Bad. So,
Cool, cool.
so,
What is a recent book that you've read that has offered immense value to you?
well, there's been a lot. Actually, a book called The Price of Time. I'm in charge of
Hmm.
something called the Hayek Book Prize, which is a $50,000 book prize that the Manhattan Institute, which publishes City Journal, does. And this is by financial journalist Edward Chancellor, and it's a forbidding topic about interest rates. It's like a history of interest rates from ancient Mesopotamia to the modern day and the current inflation, the Federal Reserve. And it's not something, I mean, I've written a lot about economics, but interest rates is like, discount rates. It's never anything I knew or wanted to know. But it's a fascinating book, and it really shows you how how manipulating interest rates is responsible for so many of the problems we have today about wealth inequality, inflation,
Hmm.
all these kind of asset bubbles in houses, why you can't afford housing. Anyway, I could go on, but it's a really fascinating book.
Wow. I'll have to check that out. The Price of Time.
Yeah,
What is a piece of advice that you've received either recently or in the past that has served you well?
good piece of advice. I guess it would be. Um, Well, I used to do a blog called Tierney Lab, and for the New York Times, and it was a science blog. And the reigning philosophy of it, its two principles were just because an idea appeals to a lot of people doesn't mean it's wrong. That's the first one. The second principle was, but that's a good working hypothesis. Basically, a lot of my career has been about debunking things, um, and I guess that I saw a recent version of that. I've been writing a lot about COVID and what I think has been the overreaction to COVID and a lot of disastrous policies. And I wrote some about Sweden's response and their head of public health and his kind of mentor. Sweden was about to close down all its schools because everybody in Europe was doing that, and his mentor sent him a piece of advice in Latin. He translated it, but it's from a famous, I think, 16th
Hmm.
century Swedish statesman who wrote a letter to his son. His son was about to go negotiate with all these foreign leaders, and he was very intimidated because he was relatively inexperienced, and he's dealing with all these seasoned rulers and diplomats. And the father said, "Do you not know, my son, with how little wisdom the world is governed?" And I guess that's something that I've thought the conventional wisdom is so often wrong, and to be skeptical of
Hmm.
that, and that has really guided me.
Mm, I love that. Thank you for that.
So,
Last question. What does the world need more of right now?
it needs more optimism. Things, we are the luckiest people in history. Things have never really been better for the average human. We have so many things, and yet we are constantly thinking, the richer we get, the more we think the world is getting worse, and it's just wrong. The world's getting better.
Mm, amazing. I love that. All right, let's jump into some topics here. So I guess my first question to start everything off is why did you decide to write this book? What was calling to you to put your maybe ideas, and maybe you with along with Roy, like to put your ideas on this and make this a thing?
Well, Roy and I, Roy Baumeister is a really prominent, incredibly brilliant psychologist. He's written books on all kinds of big ideas in psychology, and I had met him in the course of my work and admired his work. And first we did, he did the big research on self-control that showed that it's like a muscle that we can strengthen it, but we also deplete it as we use it. And we wrote that book called Willpower. And then Roy also had done this paper. Called Bad is Stronger Than Good. And I can explain that in a minute. But so I knew about that. And then in my own career, I mean, I had just kept noticing, and this was from my first job or one of my first jobs. I was an intern at the Philadelphia Bulletin, and I was sent out to cover this weather. It was a hot weekend, and they wanted me to do the weather story about what people are doing. And I started calling police stations along the Jersey Shore where people from Philadelphia go, and I started asking them, is this the worst traffic you've ever seen? And most of the cops would say, it's always like this on summer weekends. But one guy said to me, yeah, I guess it's the worst traffic I've seen. So I wrote this article irresponsibly saying, what police call the worst traffic in history. And I later felt kind of guilty about that. But I started wondering, why do journalists do this? And I kept noticing it over and over again, that we just hype crises. Why do we keep telling people that about crises? And why do people want to read this? That's the other thing. So, and then Roy wrote this paper called The Power of Bad. I mean, the bad is stronger than good, and it really explained it. I had seen how this principle dominated my profession, and Roy had the explanation for why this happens in our mind. So that was and I can explain more about that, of course, but that was really the
Yeah,
impetus for doing this book together.
that's amazing. So yeah, this book is basically about the negativity effect, the negativity bias. For those that don't know what a bias is, can you just quickly give us a common definition that's easy to understand
Sure, it's something
before we
that
like
skews our
unpack it?
thinking. I mean, the power of bad is what scientists call the negativity effect or the negativity bias, and it's the universal tendency of bad events and emotions to affect us more strongly than good events. When you hear
Hmm.
a mix of compliments and criticism, you go to a party, most people are nice to you, but you go home thinking about the one nasty thing somebody said to you. And why is that? We obsess over criticism instead of the praise. And what was groundbreaking about Roy's paper was that people had noticed aspects of this. Economists had noticed. Danny Kahneman, who won the Nobel Prize, had found that people cared a lot more about avoiding losses than gains. That if you wanted to ask them to take a risk, they would want to, like, 50-50 wasn't enough. They had to have like twice the gains because they were so afraid of losing money. So he noticed that. And psychologists had noticed that, who studied first impressions, that a good first impression helps you, but it can be if you do something bad, then it changes. But a bad first impression matters so much more. It's very hard to get over a bad first impression. So they had noticed these things. And Roy was curious about it. And so he said, well, let's find out about this. When is good stronger? When is bad stronger? And let's look. And he looked through all the psychological literature, through economics, sociology, anthropology, lots of different kinds of literature. He's a very sort of wide-ranging thinker. And to his surprise, he wanted to start off by saying, well, let's find some examples where good is stronger, where good things are stronger than bad things. And he couldn't. He and his colleagues, and they just realized they had discovered this major psychological effect that nobody had noticed because it crossed into so many different domains. And that's why they wrote this paper called Bad is Stronger Than Good. that, and it just
Yeah.
showed that in all these elements that that it skews our thinking and our behavior all day long. We focus so much on the negative. It's the easiest way to get our attention. It skews our view of the world, skews politics, skews media, skews so many things we do.
One of the interesting things that you said in the book was that I forget what experiment it was, but they were trying to find the opposite of, well, two things. One is that there's more words for bad things or
Yeah,
bad emotions than there
yeah,
are good emotions, which I thought was really interesting.
yeah.
And then they tried to find opposites of like really extreme, let's call them like very emotional words like trauma. What's the
Yeah.
opposite of trauma? Or what's the opposite of murderer?
Yeah.
And there really wasn't one. And so like it's baked into our existence that bad is like this, it weighs the most. And I was like, wow, I never really thought about it like that. Language and
Well, it is
how
strange.
readily available bad things are.
Trauma is a great example because, the one bad event can just haunt you for decades. No, but there isn't any good event that can do that. You don't spend your adult life thinking about that great day at the zoo, it doesn't have the same impact on it. And, there's a good reason for it because, this
Yeah.
helped our ancestors survive. It's more important, life has to win every day. Death only has to win once. So it's really important to pay attention to. It's more important to be wary of a poisonous berry than, and to remember that than it is to remember something that tasted really good. The one will
Hmm.
cost you your life, the other doesn't. And it's more important, I mean, it's great to appreciate your friends, but from a survival standpoint, especially, in much of our past when things were more violent, it was far more important to know to keep track of your enemies and pay attention to who might really do you in. So,
Yeah.
there's a good Darwinian reason why we pay more attention to bad. But the problem is that today, a lot of the old threats to us are not there anymore. We don't face danger every day, and yet our brains are still thinking that way, and so we overreact to all these bad things in our lives.
Yeah, and I'm thinking about just playing an attention game, right? In today's times, like one of the most valuable resources we have is where we allocate our attention, and if
Hmm.
we're not aware of this power of bad, so to use the book title, like we're gonna get drawn into places that we may not need to be, or live a life that's ruled by stress, cortisol, and adrenaline that causes health effects and ruins relationships and can stunt our growth as leaders, as parents, as friends. And so, what have you seen in maybe even your personal life or people that you've kind of worked with or studied in their inability to not work through the power of bad and just kind of allow it to exist and almost operate on default?
Yeah, I mean, you see it that it limits people in so many ways that when you're obsessing about bad things that could happen. I mean, I spent a lot of the last couple of years writing about COVID and lockdowns and things. And,
Mm-hmm.
for young people, it was really clear early this was just not a very serious risk for children, for young adults. And yet, so many people just like gave up a year or two of their lives. They were so, I can't take any risk. I'll stay home. I'll wear a mask all the time. I mean, it was certainly a risk for older people who had other conditions, but that was a classic case where you had politicians, public health officials, and the media knew that was a way to get your attention. Just tell you there's a deadly menace there, and you got to be afraid, be very afraid. And so it was effective for them. They got big audiences, but it's not effective. It didn't. It hurt so many people who lost chances, who lost a year or two of school, of business, of their lives, really, of just staying home.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, that's the most obvious recent example, but people do this all the time when they pass up opportunities to do things because they just focus, so much on what could go wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you mentioned in relationships, we've got a chapter in the Power of Bad about, how to deal with things because, the big rule on things is that what really matters, and we like to think of all the good things we do for our partner, but the real advice we give is what really matters most is avoiding the bad stuff. It's not so much doing the good things, it's avoiding the bad stuff. And we have this thing that we call the rule of four, which is I mean, it's not it's not Newton's law of nature, but if you look at all the evidence and, from studies in economics and psychology and other fields, it looks as if, that it usually takes at least three comparable good things to make up for one bad thing. They have the same impact. So, so we just advise if you want to do better, if you want to do more than break even, try to get at least four good things for every bad thing. So if you're late one time, for dinner, then don't expect to make up for it by being on time the next time. You got to do more. And so that's one of the, and studies that track spouses, over the long haul, find that really what matters is how they deal with negativity, because
Hmm.
I mean, it's important, good things are great, but what tends to go wrong in marriages is one person's negative and then the other person, attacks the other person or is negative, and then the other person responds. And what happens there, and there've been a lot of interesting experiments in laboratories when they do these called, dictator games where you have to cooperate with other people and what happens. And if someone is mean, is nasty to you, people tend to not just to retaliate, but they escalate. And then you get into this cycle of retribution and things really get out of control. So, so that's one of
Hmm.
and also the people really, the happiest couples and they've really done this. I'm married to Helen Fisher, the anthropologist, who's done some great she's a scientific advisor to Match.com, has written books called The Anatomy of Love. She's the world's most quoted authority on love. And she has done these brain scanning experiments of couples who are happily married for a long time. And one of the things she found in these brain scans, which jibes with other research, is that really happily, couples that get along, the part of their brain that picks up on the negative, it shuts down when they're looking at their partner. They sort of tamp those
Hmm.
negative things. They overlook their partner's flaws. They don't focus on it. And being able to do that is really important. I mean, some of the other advice that we have for couples is don't overpromise. People think, I want to do something for my partner, so I'll promise to do this and that. And and so we think, but what we don't realize is that not meeting a promise is really bad, and sometimes you think you'll get
Hmm.
credit for going. There are interesting experiments for like going the extra mile. We expect to get credit for it, but you don't really get that much. There were, interesting studies someone did about, she noticed when a researcher noticed that when packages from Amazon arrived early, she didn't really give them credit for that, but she was really upset if they came late. And so one of the
Hmm.
things is, don't expect credit for the extra thing, but just don't overpromise, because when you don't come through with something, it really disappoints them. And this thing, as I said, in the brain scanning experiments, give your partner the benefit of the doubt, the suspend
Hmm.
judgment. And, Helen, my wife, what she calls positive illusions. You have to have, overlook your partner's flaws. If you can try to do that and train yourself and focus on the good,
Yeah.
that's,
Well, well, I think in order to do that, one has to work on themselves and learn how to sift through their own failures and, shortcomings and traumas, and also reflect on their successes and their strengths and have a well balanced picture of who they are, not just a hyper focus on what went wrong, or worse, to attach yourself off of the latest thing that you've done that may or may have not been successful. There
yeah.
are some clients that I work with
Hmm.
that are on a project and it doesn't go the way that they want, and they forget all of the other successful projects that they're on, but because this one is the most recent,
Hmm.
their identity fluctuates, and then they get in their heads, and then they're like self-doubt, and then they get in this funk, and now they can't produce or be productive as much as they used to be.
Hmm.
And so, what that makes me think of is what you mentioned in the book around CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy,
Yeah.
and that kind of being the gold standard for psychological treatment, and it being even more effective than Prozac or Lexapro, which is a huge statement.
Right.
And really what CBT is, like what you said in the book, is a set of strategies for overcoming that negativity bias, where you put the frame of focus on the present moment not so much the past. And because we're in the moment, new choices can be made, or new insights can be had, or you're not bringing in the baggage of something that you can't change.
Mm-hmm.
And helping the client or the patient realize that they're more than just their failures and their shortcomings. And I thought that was amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully when someone hears that, it entices them or inspires them to seek that out, to talk about those things more, or to recognize the power of bad and then start shifting into more of, let's say, the good.
Right. And I mean, when you're confronting the problem and one of your clients is confronting that, you're focused on just the problem right now. I can't work this, and people despair. I remember a friend of mine who's another writer said that she's a journalist, freelance, and when she was working on an article, she would just think, ugh, I don't know what to do next. This article isn't working. I can't write anymore. And one thing she would do, she said, she would like just, get stuck, and then she would like look at her old articles and start reading them and think, well, I guess at one time I could write. And then she still at this, I can't do it anymore, but at least I could. But that is something that if you can try to look at the big picture, and think, well, I have done all these things, and I can do it going forward, but I'll get through this. I've gotten through it before. So,
Mm-hmm.
but instead of just focusing on that one negative thing in front of you right now that you can't figure out what to do on this one aspect of the current project, that's really a way to despair. And as you say, CBT, that therapy helps you try and overcome
Yeah.
that destructive thinking.
Yeah. And I wonder if your friend read 4 of her previous articles to that one article. That would be interesting to find out.
That would be the way to do it. So probably she did because
Yeah.
she didn't want to sit down and write, so she wanted to procrastinate as much as
True.
possible. Let's read lots of articles.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't know how much you said procrastination, and that was prevalent in a couple conversations that I've had recently. What are your thoughts on procrastination and how it relates to the power of bad or the negativity bias or effect?
Well, it's fear. We actually did a lot about in our first book with Roy on Willpower. We talked a lot about procrastination. In fact, I
Mm.
sort of introduced a half-joking thing called the power of positive procrastination. That if you can. If there's something you really don't want to do, it's a way that you'll get all kinds of other stuff done. At least if
Mm.
you're doing something else, you find one worse thing that you don't want to do. But it's not, I mean, it really saps your energy because it's always, there's something hanging over you that you should do. And that really interferes with getting anything done or unfinished tasks. That's something we talk about in the book
Hmm.
Willpower. One of my favorite things for dealing with it, a rule was Raymond. It was Raymond Chandler, the author of The Big Sleep and novelists have been turned into movies, and he had like 2 rules for writing. He said he would go into a room, close the door, and for 4 hours in the morning, and he said he only had 2 rules. One were you don't have to write, and the rule number 2 was you can't do anything else. And he said, if you just sit there, you'll get bored enough that you'll start writing. And that's what I try to do. I mean, I use a little timer on my desk, and I don't do 4 hours. I do like a 90-minute thing, and I start that. And, I don't have to write, but I can't do anything. I can't surf the web. I can't do anything else. So, and I think, but I've had problems with procrastination. It's an easy thing to because when you're not sure what to do with something, it's hard to go forward, and it takes that willpower because you're making decisions, and that's another theme of
Yeah.
willpower, that making decisions diminishes your self-control. It's called ego depletion, and it really in just having to make decisions, it's a lot of mental energy, and so we try to avoid doing that by finding something else. We don't have to make a decision. So
Yeah. Do you find in any of your research, whether it's, of your own life or others that you've studied, where let's call them high performers, people who, have a lot of output, who are very goal oriented, type A, successful monetarily, just doing a lot of things. Do you find anywhere that they leverage the power of bad in the form of maybe fear or in the form of creating hypothetical bad situations and in an attempt to motivate them to do the thing that they don't want to do to avoid the potential thing that hasn't happened yet.
That's an interesting. I can't think of examples, but that's an interesting thing about trying to set up a penalty for yourself. And one of the big things in self-control and willpower and getting yourself to do things is um, you have to set a goal, you have to monitor yourself toward that goal, and it's good to have rewards and punishments for yourself, incentives. So, how do you set that up? So
Mm-hmm.
that would be one way to have a real punishment. Oh my God, if I don't do this, the world's, my career is ruined. I mean, the problem is that it's so much stress. If you're got this false sense of, if I don't succeed on this one project, I'm washed up, my career is over. But I think,
Mm-hmm.
one of the things in the power of bad that we talk about for motivating people is, for students, we talk about a lot too, is that penalties are much more powerful than rewards. And that's one of the things that
Yes.
students today, this everybody gets a trophy, everybody gets an A. It's just students don't learn as much. That we learn much more from failure than we do from success. And so in that sense, I think high performance people learn from that, and they
Yeah.
analyze what went wrong and they don't do it again. Instead of, and I think, effective teachers use those, and there have been, some interesting experiments with teachers, for instance, when and the experiments would be that they would get a bonus if their students did better at the end of the year on a test. And some of the teachers would get a positive bonus, and some of the teachers would basically get money taken out of their pay. And it was more effective if it was taken out, because once they had that money, they really didn't want to, give it up again. Whereas getting the extra bonus was not as motivating. So I think in that sense, probably successful people do really use those things of penalties that, or maybe
Yeah.
just a personal thing where if I don't do this, then I can, I'm going to somehow penalize myself.
Right, right. You use an example in the book with Frito-Lay,
Hmm.
and one of the lines that was associated to the story was discipline without punishment. Can you share that kind of example and story, and then what that means? Because what I'm taking from it is there's layers to how you use the stick, right?
Hmm.
There may be short-term approaches and then maybe long-term approaches, or maybe a combination of both. So, can you share that with us?
Yeah, there was, I mean, there are different ways to punish people. In the Frito-Lay, they had somebody who, they had disgruntled employees who were writing obscene messages in their things, and they were just, firing them or doing, and they brought in another guy who just, um, he used smaller punishments, but they were just more targeted, and they gave people more of a chance to. It wasn't so much this war against the employees where both sides were dug in, and they were just, the management would be overreacting, and then the employees would just fight right back. And this was, he would talk to them, and I mean, one thing managers do is, that you send someone, you warn them once, then the second time or the third time, however you want to do it, you just send them home and say, look, if you don't want to work here, that's fine, and you can leave here and no hard feelings. But you have to decide if you really want to be here. And they would give them, just take tomorrow off. We'll pay you for it, but you have to think about whether you want to be here or not, and make that decision. And if you don't want to come back, fine, but it's your decision. And just something to emphasize the stakes without necessarily this horrible punishment. We're going to dock your pay for a week. We just make the worker mad. His friends are mad. So this was a real way to focus that and to bring the threat
Yeah.
of being fired without actually bringing the hammer down so hard.
Yeah, what I hear there is like a difference between force and invitation,
Huh,
right? The
interesting.
in,
Yeah.
the invitation is like I'm giving you a choice here, but
Hmm.
before you make your choice, here's what's at stake.
Hmm.
Obviously, we want you to work here, but your behavior is not tolerable. Like that's just not what we do here.
Yeah.
And if you want to leave, that's fine, but I'm going to give you the day paid because I want to communicate to you that we still care about you.
Hmm.
And I'd like for you to come back tomorrow with your choice made on where you want to go. And I think putting it in their court forces them to think and take ownership of their decision as opposed to forcing them to say, hey, you got to change your behavior. Even though the employer's right, it still feels like you're robbing the person of like the choice to change.
Of their autonomy, of their agency, really, yeah. No, no, I think the
Exactly.
more you can do that to people, that's a great way to do it. And I mean, it's it's so hard to. One of the things we talk about how do you criticize employees, and we talk about the criticism sandwich. That it was this traditional thing where you start off with something nice, and then you tell them what's bad, what they've done wrong. This is in your evaluation, and then you end with something nice. And we're saying that the problem is that they just walk out of there, and all they remember is the bad stuff. So
Hmm.
and it's really more important. I mean, the strategy we suggest is, you can start out by just saying something nice, make it clear you're not firing them. That's no, but then get the bad stuff out of the way first, because that's what people want to hear. That's what they're just waiting to hear. And until you get to the bad stuff, they're not really listening to you. They're just keyed up. What's the criticism? Then after you say the bad stuff, then they're on high alert. They're taking everything in. And then you can make sure you do a lot of good stuff after that, so you don't demoralize them. But just trying to sneak it in the middle is not it's not going to work.
Yeah, I did read that, and that was actually on my list of things to ask you. And I didn't know that that was originated by Mary Kay of
Yeah,
Mary Kay Cosmetics in
yeah.
the
I mean, it
80s.
sounds it
That
sounds
was
reasonable. It sounds, um, but it
it
just
sounds
does.
like you're trying not to hurt their feelings, and
Right.
that you can't really control. In a business environment, it's how do I get you the information that you need to know to be the most effective at your job? And
Hmm.
sometimes that needs to be delivered in a, well, not sometimes, I think most times, if not all the time, needs to be delivered authentically and honestly.
Hmm.
And you could try and display that and deliver that in the most happiest, positive way, and someone is still going to get offensive or take that offensive. And so what it comes down for me is like when I hear that, it's like, okay, here's the truth that maybe no one has ever said to you before, but you need to hear.
Hmm.
And I care enough about you to say this to you. And then they receive it.
Yeah.
Cool. And here's something that is in addition to that is actually more on the, you don't say this, that it's on the positive side, but it builds from there. It's like you kind of hit rock bottom in a way, and then you build them up, like you're saying. And I like that. I think it brings more honesty
Right.
earlier into the conversation.
Yeah, I mean, it's what they're waiting to hear, and then you tell them, here's the
Exactly.
problem, and then a lot of here's how we're going to deal. Here's how we solve that, and you get with strategies to do something, and ask them, tell them what you think the problem is, and ask them for their reaction. What do you think about that? And
Yeah.
then and when how can we do this better? So and
Hmm.
make it a collaboration, but. It's a hard thing to do. And, and as you said earlier, people bring so many of their own, um, neuroses and anxieties and their past to it, and you're dealing with that. Some of the interesting experiments with spouses who didn't get along, um, was, that if one spouse was insecure and really was afraid it was, that he or she was his partner didn't love him, that could really start to gnaw away at things. One of my favorite experiments in the book, that was hilarious, was a couple would go into the lab and they would sit with their backs to each other. They'd each be a little table, and they were given, this questionnaire to fill out, and they were told that they were filling out the same questionnaire, and the question would be, one person would get a thing, saying, list some things about your partner that you don't like, and try to list at least a couple things. You don't have to do any more than five. Two's fine. And so they would just do it, and then they would just stop writing, and then the other person, they thought it was answering the same question, but the questionnaire said, please make a list of every object in your house. So they finished writing, well, here's a couple things I don't like about my
Oh my
partner. And then they're
gosh.
listening as their partner is just writing and writing and writing and thinking, what? And so, and they found that these people then immediately get defensive, and they'd start, and especially the ones who really were insecure, to begin with, they would then just start withdrawing from the relationship, and they'd see it in the
Yeah.
experiment, and they would just, and those are the kind of people they'd start, you can't fire me, I quit. They'd start withdrawing. And so if you have that insecurity to begin with, you then react to any slight, whether it's imaginary or not, and you start pulling back, and then that really just poisons things. So,
I've definitely noticed that in my clients and just in the work that I've done, over the last, I don't know, 9 years. Is like in conversation, when you leave mystery, people almost always fill it in with bad things. They're
really, yeah.
referencing uncertainty from their past and inserting it as a possibility of what's going to come next in an attempt to prepare themselves for, the worst case scenario.
Yeah.
And so a lot of leaders that I coach will not be clear in their delivery of feedback or in their expectations or what their job role is or just what their intentions are. And as they start asking questions to the employee, there's gaps in what's being said and what's being understood. And those gaps usually get filled in with like, oh, my leader doesn't like me. They don't support me. I don't think I should be here. And it's like nowhere near. The leader is wanting to develop a relationship and trying to be supportive and encouraging and challenging, but there's a disconnect there.
Hmm.
And so I find I'm trying to like help them close that gap and use more questions than statements or less assumptions and more inquiry and explaining intentions as opposed to just jumping in. And all that is like creating a space where it's safe to talk about unknown things. And
Uh-huh.
people don't like uncertainty,
Right.
And
And so you
so,
want them to fill in
yeah,
the dots and not, and don't leave those uncertainties. Yeah.
yeah,
No, and I would think that's a hard thing because we all, have blind spots where we think, well, of course they know I mean this, or of course they know this, and people really don't think that, they don't know that.
exactly,
So,
exactly.
and that's what a good
Yeah,
leader can do.
yeah.
So,
So one of the other things that you mentioned in the book was that was pertaining to critics and their reputations, and how if a critic left a negative comment, they were seen as more either brilliant or knowledgeable.
yeah.
Why is that?
Well, I mean, it has to do with that praising, I guess, just seems weaker and strong. I'm going to do that. I mean, it's certainly
Mm,
critics have always known this that the best way to make a name for yourself is to write nasty reviews. Because they're very memorable. People just pay attention to it. And those experiments, as you say, were interesting. That they would just assume that somebody, and I guess maybe it takes more effort to criticize than it is to say, "Nice job, I love this," and here's what I don't like about you. That confrontation, it takes more effort, and it does somehow. I mean, I guess the critic is also saying, "I know more than this author or this director or this. I know more. I'm better than they are. I know what they are," and we sort of fall for that sometimes. That it's so easy to criticize someone.
mm,
So. But it's just the way that bad things stand out to us, that power of
yeah.
bad.
When writing this book, what stood out to you the most that shocked you or that you walked away being like, this is something I'm gonna use the rest of my life in my relationships, in my business, in my writing, in everything? Was there something that like really stood out to you?
Let's see. I mean, one little thing that I try to avoid is that I certainly try to use a lot is called the fundamental attribution error. And what this is that when we do something wrong, like if you run a red light or you're late for something, you think of it as, well, I was under stress, or there was a reason, there was a crisis. It's not that I'm bad at, that I'm a bad person or that I did it. It's there were circumstances beyond my control. But when we see, since someone else does it, you see someone else run a red light. Well, he's a terrible driver, or
That's
she
so true.
obviously is a rude person. She shows up late. And so we think it's not because of circumstances, it's because of their character. They have basic character flaws. And so I try to, when something goes wrong, when someone else does something irritating, I try to think, well, maybe they were really rude, but maybe they just had a crisis at home, or maybe there's something going on wrong in their life, and not to make that judgment. against other people. And I think try to think of another explanation for it, and and just think there could be explanations for it. That.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of a little thing. I mean, as far as the big thing, it's this idea of how to see the world that, and this is something, my whole career I've done is, and there's a problem we devoted, a chapter called the crisis, which is that everything, the fundamental rules of that are that the world will always seem to be in crisis. The crisis is never as bad as it seems, and the solution could easily make things worse. Those are the three rules. And so now, I mean, just when I watch the news, when I read anyone, when I listen to politicians, I just realize they're trying to scare me because that's the easiest way to get attention. It's the easiest way to get money. We have a crisis, we have to suspend the rules, you have to give me more power, you have to give me more money. You have to pay attention to me. That's what journalists do. And and I just look at this all the time. And when one of the ways just, in your personal life and also just when it comes to looking at, problems, environmental problems, political problems, is instead of looking at when one thing goes wrong, journalists have this rule that, three anecdotes make a trend. So you find three people who've done something, and then we have this increasing trend that people are unhappy, that people are at risk of this. But it's always just to look at long-term trends. Don't focus on that one problem that's going on there. And I think this is just true in so many things. And it's, as you say, we were talking earlier about in your when you have one problem, don't obsess on that. Think about your long-term thing. But it's certainly a way to look, I think, at politics and public policy and institutions. So many things is look at the long-term trend. And this is why, when I hear young people saying, "Oh, I don't want to have children. I can't bring them into this world." And you think, well, I mean, until very recently, there was, half of babies died before they reached 2 years old, and most people in the world were illiterate. They were underfed, they were hungry, and now we have all these great, opportunities for people to learn, and so look at the long-term trend, to me, some of the most interesting statistics in this book were surveys when in developing countries, in poorer countries like India and in Africa, people were much more optimistic than in America and Europe because, they've seen how rapidly, the average person has been lifted out of poverty. All these new technologies have come and made their lives better, and they've seen how much it's changed in their lives. But we've just gotten kind of spoiled here, and we're so rich that we can afford to obsess about problems that, for most of our human history, just nobody cared about. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
people were just worried about surviving. So, I mean, it's a good thing that we're rich enough that we can, care about doing more things and care about this. But we get this distorted idea that things are getting worse and that we somehow have to stop progress because, oh my God, the world's going to hell. And it's a really bad way to look at the world, I think, and to look at your life.
I love that. The three things that that stood out to me, and I remember reading that in the book.
Mhm.
The there's always going to be a crisis.
Yeah,
The crisis is never as bad as it seems, and the solution may very well make the situation worse,
yeah, yeah. I mean,
which is
COVID was
not
the, I
something
mean,
I
COVID,
think.
and this book was published right before COVID. And I've been debunking crises much of my career, the energy crisis, remember in the 1980s, but we were all going in the 70s, we're all going to run out of fossil fuels. We're going to run out of the new age of scarcity. We're going to run out of everything, and we'd all be starving because there wouldn't be enough food. There were all the population crisis. There were all these things and they didn't come true. And so and that's what I write about, and the solutions often did make things worse. I mean, one of the horrible, like the population crisis that these Western intellectuals said, we're all, everyone's going to starve because we'll never be able to feed it. And they supported like preventing people from having children in China. And they tried to do that some in the West, but they could, people wouldn't stand for it. I mean, motherhood is a pretty basic human right. But
Hmm.
China did it, and they limited their people to, they limited parents to one child, and it led to all these forced abortions, and I mean, it's a huge human right abuse. And now China's got a problem. It doesn't have enough young people it's got a very, aging population, and it doesn't have enough young workers to take care of them. So that's the thing where when you overreact, you do make things worse. And some of the stuff we did during the energy crisis, they were so convinced that we're running out of natural gas, which is a pretty clean fuel, that we have to save it because it's not going to be around for long. And so they banned any new natural gas power plants. And so all these coal plants were built because you couldn't use natural. And so now the coal plants are much worse for global warming, because they emit far more. That's just so we have more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere because of this phony crisis that we had before. And then, as I say, I've been debunking this stuff for a long time, but I was still stunned, at what happened in COVID. It was a genuine problem, certainly for older people, but to just wreck the economy, to deprive kids of 2 years of school, the solution was so much worse than the problem. I mean, there really isn't, I've written a lot about this and I won't go on too much of a tangent, but there really is no evidence that the lockdowns saved any lives. I mean, Sweden did better than the rest of Europe. Florida did as well or better than the rest of the US. But there is a lot of evidence that a lot of, especially young people, died from other causes, drug overdoses, suicide, car accidents, because of the effects of the lockdown and all the psychological toll that took. So that's really a case where the solution made things worse.
So I'm thinking about what you're saying, and the common denominator there is we're rushing too quickly to say that what we're gonna do is the solution.
Yeah.
What is the solution if what is being presented is seen as a big problem? And what if it's a new problem? And I don't know if there are new problems. Maybe it's just a
Yeah.
reoccurring problem that comes every other generation. But like, what's the and maybe it's a hard question to answer. What's the time frame of like looking at the trends, finding the data before having to act? Or do we act? And I imagine people that govern these types of things, like government or politicians, like they're feeling the pressure from their constituents or the people who vote for them or what they represent, that they're wanting to get something moving to make it seem like they're doing something, which could or is most likely not helping. What? How do we? Any thoughts there? Any suggestions? Any
Yeah, no, I
things
mean,
to
it's a
think about?
really tough problem, and what you're talking about is, the classic illogical thing, something must be done, this is something, therefore it must be done,
Right, right.
and I mean, it's the basic problem of politics, and that politicians, I mean, it selects for people, and it's a job requirement, really, that you can only care about the next election. That's your whole job depends on getting reelected. And that depends on getting attention while you're on the campaign trail and while you're in office, and also in rewarding the right people who can help you get reelected. So they are, I mean, some of them are well intentioned, but basically, if you take the really long view, you'll be out of a job. Somebody else will come along who's
Yeah.
thinking about how to win the next election. So it's inherently a short-term proposition, and their main thing, I mean, like the main thing for politicians is, how do I win this news cycle? How do I get in front of a camera? How do I tweet something? How do I come out ahead and get publicity today? And that's their job. And journalists are the same way. They, how do I get someone to pay attention to my stuff today? Not whether it's actually holds up, makes any sense a year from now. So those are just two inherently short-range professions. And I guess my solution is to give them as little attention and power as possible. I mean, I think, that, obviously you have to have a government, you have to have politicians, but I think in COVID, what they did in Sweden and Florida was they tried to tell people the facts as best they could. Here are the risks, here's who's at risk, and then let people make their own decisions. People, and if you're at risk, then stay home, do this. But trusting people to make decisions instead of trying to make a rule that will make the problem go away for everyone, is a solution. And again, we're just back to, when something bad happens, is to look at it and say, is this really a crisis or not? I mean, are things really getting worse, or is just, bad things happen? Is this one bad thing? Is this happening more often than it used to, or not? And if it's
Yeah.
not, if the trend line is good, then don't do anything.
Right.
And so often
And I
that's what.
guess
Go ahead.
yeah, and I guess that like no matter what happens, I think someone's always going to see it as a catastrophe or something bad.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
in human dynamics, whoever can articulate something to a degree that people understand or it's digestible or it creates emotion
Hmm.
is usually going to sway an audience to a certain direction. And if whoever is very articulate, but using that articulation to catastrophize a situation that's not really bad objectively, but the person believes it's bad, then they're going to push the narrative to a large amount of people that then get them to join that ideology because most people don't think as deeply as they could.
Hmm.
And because someone comes along and says it in a way that is appealing and it resonates, there's an affinity there. Um, that that's hard. It's like no matter what's happening, there's always, like to your earlier point, no matter what's happening, there's always going to be a catastrophe. But your point is like, well, how is it as bad as it is? And some people will say no, and some people will say yes. And
Right.
then
The
so there's
problem
always
is,
going to be that conflict.
right. No, and the problem is the incentives are also wrong because, if you say something's a crisis and this is a horrible problem that and then there's a big incentive. You get attention and you also get money. You say, I know how to solve this
Mm-hmm.
problem, and you get power and money. Somebody was, during COVID when they kept declaring emergencies. I mean, I think it was
Yeah.
the economist Friedrich Hayek who said, if you can use an emergency to gain power, there will always be emergencies, because people always want power. And so there's that huge incentive to do it. And there aren't great rewards for debunking. People don't, okay, it's not a problem, but nobody gives you a grant. If you say, here's something that's not a problem, nobody gives you a grant to study that. Nobody funds you to start a program to do, so the incentives are all wrong. And, um, I mean, one example
Hmm.
in the book we have is the whole history of religion, and you look at it in America that religions that and there's been it's a real interesting trend in America that if you don't have something bad, hell, if you don't have the concept of hell to attract people's attention and get them in the pews, religions just start losing people. And there's this, I mean, I could go on more if you want, but
Hmm.
going back to the colonial days, as religions would get like more mainstream and the ministers would go to seminary and become more educated, they would start downplaying hell. And then what would happen is a new religion would come along. The Baptists or the Methodists came along, then the Baptists and the Catholics, and now the evangelicals. And a new religion comes around that is warning them, you're going to hell. And that's the religion that grows. And the other one loses. People, they don't go to church if there isn't a fear of hell. So I mean, that's the great
Interesting.
religious example of it. So.
And so part of, and correct me if I'm wrong, but part of your mission is to get this message out there so that we're making decisions from a holistic view rather than a short-term, fear-based, emotional, unaware place.
Right. It's trying, I mean, the negativity effect, this power bad, it's in this sort of primal part of our brain that just, reacts reflexively to bad things. And
Right.
it's very hard to deal with that. And the only, I mean, the way to try to do it is to get your rational brain involved, to try to look at trends, look at facts instead of just the emotion of something. And
Hmm.
somehow got to try to override that and think about this, the long term, think about what the facts are, what the real risks are here, and then behave and to be very skeptical of people who are just trying to scare you. I mean, so much, the um I mean, the internet is great, I think. I mean, people talk about, oh, it's so awful on social media, but some of the interesting research is that social media is not as negative as conventional mass media. And now that people think, oh, there's all this sniping and cancel culture, and obviously there are problems, but mainstream media is really built, and more, not because now that it's around the clock and it's your counting instant clicks, it's really panic porn. The easiest way to get those clicks is to scare people. Whereas on social media, I mean, some people, obviously try to do that on social media, but when people share stuff with their friends, they don't share they tend to share more positive things. They share uplifting things rather than, the negative stuff. Like you don't send your friend, a picture of a massacre or, that. You send them, here's an interesting new movie, or here's the interesting thing about cosmology and the universe. And and that's because, we're all motivated by the same basic fears of death and fears of violence. So it's easy. So if you're a mass medium, then you know exactly those very simple buttons to push to scare people. But the things are positive things. The things, like, we're history buffs, we're science buffs, we have a hobby, we do volunteer work, we do some the positive parts of our lives. They're much more niche things. People have, you don't, and so you don't get a mass audience that way. But that's where social media is great because there are all these groups that form and all these, and most of the stuff on social media is actually positive. People don't,
Hmm.
typically send their friends nasty emails. They don't send, awful stuff. And there are interesting studies
Yeah.
how, the negative, scary stuff can spread, quickly, but it doesn't spread as far as the positive stuff. So that's the
Hmm.
encouraging, and that's one of the encouraging things that I take is that I think the more we can, curate what we pay attention to and follow the right people on social media, look at the right places, you can get a much more realistic and positive view of the world.
Yeah. You may have already answered this, but as we wind down here, a couple questions for you personally, just being a journalist.
Mhm.
I don't consider myself a journalist, but I respect the trade and the diligence that it goes into, like the research behind it. And that's what I like. I like researching, I like learning. And
Mhm.
from your, career working at the New York Times and all the projects that you've been a part of, what has been a framework, and maybe it's the three things that you talked about, with
Yeah.
the trend and or
Yeah.
whatever. What's a framework that you've uncovered or realized that you're like, this is really valuable just for anyone in life to use, but I learned it by being a journalist.
Well, I guess, I mean, I touched on this earlier, but I really do think the biggest problem in public life is this crisis that we're just constantly getting
Okay.
jerked into overreacting, and I saw that through journalism, and I've gotten really cynical about my own profession. I think it's gotten worse. I mean, the great thing about now, I think, on social media is that there are so many outlets, and if you know who to follow, you can really get, for instance, during COVID, I thought, the mainstream media it was nothing but scaring people and giving bad advice. But there were lots of really smart people on the web, scientists, others, who were really analyzing the data, looking at the research, and you could find it. And that's something
Yeah.
that didn't used to exist. It was hard to find that. And now I think, so in that sense, but I'm very skeptical about, and I'm really encouraged to see all these citizen journalists, see all these people who have started their own websites, who really just, and get known because they actually do honest, rational reporting. And I think it's great that with Substack and in places like that, that you can find these voices, uh, and uh, and they're available, and they bring out the best in people who just want to try and do it and just stand on, is the stuff I'm doing accurate or not, and
Yeah.
does it convince people. So and that, but I'm more and more cynical of my own profession because I think it's gotten the race for clicks and the race for and also the niche audiences that everybody's, I'm going to tell a certain audience exactly what it wants to hear. You see that on the right
Yeah.
and the left, and it's unfortunately it's turned out, I mean, the business model in journalism used to be that it used to be supported by advertising mainly, and so advertisers didn't want to, they wanted to appeal to both sides. They wanted readers from out, and they didn't want really controversial, inflammatory stuff because they want their product to have sort of a good vibe with people. But now that advertising doesn't really support it, now it's subscriptions, and what but on the both the left and the right have found that that giving people giving people telling people how awful the other side is and giving you example after example of how awful the other side is a good business model. And I just think, that the news consumer has to use good judgment in how to avoid that.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, my last question is a mixture of a share and then followed by a question. One, I have a professor and a mentor who teaches a mental performance class, and he was at UNLV, and he was a 4-time world-renowned mental performance coach. And one of the things that he said to me when I was in my early 20s was, as humans, we are designed for survival, not for greatness. And if you want to be great, you have to rewire your brain to be great, right? And so with that, being that we've talked a lot about this just being embedded, this natural negativity bias that we just come equipped with, operating in survival and going after what we deem as greatness, what would you say are the few fundamental steps that anyone can make in going from living a survival default life into a life of design and in a pursuit of a person that they want to be or a goal that they want to achieve?
Well, I think the first thing you can do is buy both my books, of course.
Yes, of course, yes. For
but
those of you who want
Willpower,
that, this is it
Willpower
right
has a lot.
here.
Our first book, Willpower, has got a lot of advice for how you set goals and how you make yourself do it. One of the secrets there is to outsource self-control. That that the interesting things with really successful people who are being great, is they thought they must have amazing willpower and self-control to be able to stay so focused. And what they found when they actually followed them through the day and in various experiments was that their big secret was that they didn't test their willpower. They structured their lives so as to avoid temptation, avoid distractions. You don't have ice cream in your freezer, so you don't have to exert any self-control not to eat it. And that's one of the secrets, the simple things just for maximizing self-control. And then, I think and so that's how you get things accomplished, is by setting goals, monitoring yourself, and avoiding those temptations to be doing it. And then I think, to achieve greatness is not getting yourself bogged down with these negative thoughts to try and do it. And using, we have a chapter in the Power of Bad about glad games, where how do basically stressing the positive, not the negative. And when bad things happen, instead of despairing at it, you override your gut reaction and you look for a lesson in it. How can I, what did that teach me? And you hear
Mm-hmm.
so many really successful people saying the best thing that ever happened to me was I got fired or I failed at that, and I think being able to do that, um, and then also, capitalizing on good stuff. I mean, that's a way to be happy. One of Mark, Twain's aphorism is there's one of his characters says, to get the full value of a joy, you must have somebody to divide it with. He said, grief can be shared, but and you want to share grief. But, grief we can tolerate alone, he said, but you've got to share the joy. And I think, and reliving them, with the interesting stuff in the book about, they used to think that people who look back fondly and this, with nostalgia at the past, that they had a psychological problem, that clearly they were depressed. That's why they were living in the past. And there's all this research that just reliving, good things in the past, it just boosts your optimism, boosts your sense of connection, and it makes you more optimistic for the future. And so I think that, and what we've been talking about, just trying to see the big picture and don't get bogged down, look at long-term trends, and and believe that you can do things and be optimistic. Because the secret that you won't find in in most media, and you won't hear it from preachers, and that is that things are mostly getting better, and you can be
Mm-hmm.
part of that, and you can enjoy it.
Yeah. John, thank you so much for being here. Those listening, go get this book. It was so nice. I bought two, so I got an Audible, and then I got it, and
Oh,
because I
thank
wanted
you.
to underline in the actual tangible. So thank you, and then Willpower. So, where is the best place for people to find you if they have questions, if they want to get in contact with you? Is that through email? Where's that?
I guess at City Journal, they can write to me there. I write there, and I've got a website, johntierneynyc.com too. That's got that I should be updating more often. I need a little more willpower there, but
You got to create
so
a bad scenario for yourself to motivate.
right. I'll try and do that. So.
Yeah.
So,
Cool. Well,
but
thank
it's
you
been
for your
really
time,
fun
John.
talking to you. Thanks very much, and I'm impressed with with the questions and the work you do with your clients. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I appreciate that.